to the 2026 K-State Garden Hour webinar series. We're so glad that you're here. This webinar started in 2020 and has been collaborative of the entire K-State Horticulture Extension team. Since the start of the program, we've reached over 113,000 gardeners just like you. We are pleased to continue offering the K-State Garden Hour series for free. If you have enjoyed these educational webinars, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support this program. The link to donate can be found in the chat or on our K-State Garden Hour website. This webinar is hosted by Kansas State Extension. My name is Andrea Burns, and I am the Ag and Natural Resources Agent in Ford County. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Many of us have a background in horticulture education or a related discipline, but most of all, we have a love for educating and sharing important gardening topics. I think this is a great series for myself. I learn a lot every time I tune in because I don't have a horticulture background, and I'm really glad and grateful that we're able to provide this programming not only for agents like myself, but other Kansans. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping things to cover. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to the presentation. This is where we will look for questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. You should see a button along the button tab that says Q&A. Just click on that and you will be able to enter your question. Today's webinar will be recorded and it will be posted to our K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to each topic as well. If we share links through the chat, we will also link them on the website. Our website is also where you have access to previous topics and upcoming topics in the series. Our moderators for today are Kala Edwards and Sharon Ashworth. They will be sharing information through the chat during the presentation. They will also help us facilitate the Q&A portion of this webinar. Today's topic is Naturalistic Landscape Design, a Kansas perspective and flexible approach to every garden. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Cheryl Boyer. Please give us a few moments while we transition and share the presentation slides.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. I'm so excited to see that there are so many of you who are interested in learning about this topic. It's the right time of year, right? We're all sort of beginning to come out of winter. My tulips are peeking up. It's time to think about gardening. So I'm glad that you all are here joining us together at the same time because we're all thinking about working in our yard soon. Maybe you're already out there. Let me share my screen here just a second. It's been kind of funky on me, so I am going to see if we can get this party started. All right, I got to reshare. Okay, how's that look, team? Are we good?
Looks great.
Looks good.
Excellent. Well, as Andrea said, I'm your speaker for today. So my name is Cheryl Boyer, and I've been with K-State for almost 18 years. And my background is nursery crop production and marketing, but my undergraduate degree is in landscape architecture from Oklahoma State University. And in the last few years, I have had just a wonderful pleasure and opportunity of working with colleagues in the landscape architecture department here at K-State as they sort of began to explore some ideas around naturalistic landscaping. And so that work is really continuing. So you can certainly expect to hear more from our team over the foreseeable future. We have a pretty big effort focused on this topic headed or putting it together. So I'm excited to share some of what we learned and get you thinking about how you could apply this in your landscape or begin to think about applying it in your landscape, and also maybe give yourself a little bit of grace for not having or for having the landscape that you have, because you know what? Everything that we're doing is all about getting us outside and enjoying the natural environment and gardening and improving our mental health and improving the spaces around us. And however you choose to do that is right. So, thank you for being here with us and thinking about how you're tackling the horticulture in your space. So, I wanted to mention where my co-authors on some of this. Julia Hams she was a former Master's of Landscape Architecture student, and she pulled together all of this data, and many of you probably responded to that survey. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But Julia was the student who did all of that design and analysis of the study, and the image that you see in the background is one that she created. And her major professors, Howard Hahn and Leslie Wren, who were with the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning here at K-State. So they have been wonderful partners in all of this. So this whole idea sort of starts with the premise of, you know, some consumers consider traditional lawns to be somewhat resource intensive. So we're talking about water and needing extra water, needing lots of fertilizer, needing pesticides to manage some of those things, issues that you might have in the landscape, maintenance equipment that emits carbon, things that concern our citizens in terms of environmental outcomes. So they're very interested in contributing to, or they're concerned about a reduced wildlife habitat, lack of biodiversity. There's a lot of interest in pollinator support. Um, so that has been a concern. And for the case for the this presentation, we're defining traditional lawns as those that are composed of primarily one grass species. It's free from weeds and pests, so it looks beautiful. It's perfect. It's continuously green, lots of fertilization, and mowed regularly to an even height. And for some, that is a very pleasing aesthetic. There is nothing wrong with that, but there's also lots of opportunity to change our approach so that we can add more biodiversity to those landscapes. So again, getting outside and working in your yard is all positive and good, and we're glad you're doing it. Naturalistic landscapes are some alternatives to lawns, and they're characterized by mixed grasses, herbaceous species, and primarily the plants are allowed to grow and assume natural forms and habits, and there's not a ton of pruning. They are in their natural form, natural habitat, and we're really thinking about that ecological basis for the all those aspects of naturalistic landscape design. So we're going to talk more about that. Infrequent mowing is a nice advantage. Sometimes fire is used for maintenance, and that may be a restriction in some places, and it may not be something that's ever been discussed in others. So how do we handle those challenges is part of the naturalistic landscape design style idea. It's often using native species or cultivars, but not always. It exists on a spectrum, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. There is a somewhat of a resistance to widespread adoption because there's a lack of awareness and understanding. For sure, there's some challenges with local ordinances and landscape requirements, and there are some negative perceptions. So we wanted to learn more about that and try to figure out how we could overcome those challenges and move the idea forward so that more people could have the advantages of a naturalistic landscape design. So what are those advantages? Why does naturalistic landscape design style matter in Kansas? And I saw we have some people from all over the globe participating in this presentation. So hello and welcome. We're glad you're here. And we're really focusing on Kansas, but a lot of these principles can apply wherever you are. And it really boils down to what makes sense from an ecological standpoint where you're from. So in our case, we're thinking about adaptations to our Kansas climate. Sometimes it can be really hot and dry in the summer. We have drought fairly frequently. It's one thing that's very extra special about this part of the world is our wind. So we have a little bit of everything. We have cold in the winter. So it's a challenging environment, as is everywhere around the world for growing different types of plants, but it also makes us unique, and we can grow some really cool stuff and do some neat horticulture with the climate that we have. So, naturalistic landscape design is choosing plants that are more adapted to the conditions that we already have, and that leads to less water use once it's established and fewer maintenance needs. So that can be really appealing depending on the garden that you are working with. Now, there's also an ecological cult and cultural connection. So we are very lucky in that in this part of the world, we do have a prairie heritage, and that promotes biodiversity through our native plant restoration and other aspects of gardening in this way. Wherever you are, there is going to be an ecological niche that you are in. And if you are doing a naturalistic landscape design that fits in that part of the world, then it will look different, but the concepts will remain the same. Another benefit for Kansas is supporting our pollinators and wildlife. So they provide essential habitat for native bees, butterflies, and other wildlife amid urban areas. So, sometimes we have these little pockets in our urban areas that we need to provide habitat for insects and wildlife that really support other aspects of what makes our world go round. So every one of us can play a role in that, no matter how large or small our gardening space is. And then lastly, aesthetic and practical flexibility. So naturalistic landscape design style blends native and non-native ornamental plants, balancing ecological benefits with homeowner preferences or uh, consumer preferences and maintenance ease. And so working through what those mean and what that looks like for you is part of the process. So today's presentation is going to cover a handful of things. We're going to go over some of the results of the survey that some of you may have participated in and learn some insights from that process. We'll talk about the naturalistic design continuum. So there's a couple of features there to cover. We'll go over some practical design principles and talk about how to overcome challenges related to naturalistic landscape designs in different parts of, depending on where you live. All right, so let's go over that survey. Who answered that survey, first of all? We prepared it. It was approved by the Institutional Review Board, so we were able to move it through the process of publication eventually. And we were targeting Kansas landscape consumers. So homeowners with naturalistic landscaping, homeowners with no interest in naturalistic landscape, so that we could understand what some of those barriers were, and non-homeowners as well that may not have space that they feel like they can alter in terms of the soil around their home. So we distributed it to about 5,000 potential respondents through the Horticulture e-newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do. You can respond to the emails that come along with K-State Garden Hour, and we'll get you signed up on the listserv. Comes out weekly, and we just sent out the first one for the year yesterday. So that's full of lots of good information. And when we have research opportunities, we like to make you share those with you through that tool. So this was done in February of 2024. So about this time of year, it was over the spring when people are thinking about it. We also shared it with our Extension Master Gardener volunteers, and they had access to it as well. So people who are already horticulture consumers, we spread it through our extension agent networks, and we closed the survey on this day, March 4th, in 2024. So we had it open for 21 days. We did do a little pretest with graduate students to make sure that it made sense and you could follow through it. And we had 270 complete responses, which was only a 5.4% response rate, but 270 is still pretty good for such a targeted survey. And we had a handful of you from other states who were like, I still want to answer that survey, so I'm gonna. So where did those people live? And what did they look like? Our demographics very closely matches the gardening public in general, and that is that it tends to be a somewhat more mature audience, fewer people that are young, and a little bit more female than male. And a lot of you are respondents to this survey were retired, and it was the Kansas response, not Hispanic or Latino, 90%, and 90% were white or Caucasian. So that was our stakeholder audience. Where were they living? So we were able to I think they gave us their zip codes and we were able to track exactly where we had some responses. We tried to get more responses from Western Kansas and just didn't get very many more. But we did have a pretty broad swath of the state that did respond. So it's exciting to see what everybody had to say about naturalistic landscape design styles. In terms of their property size and maintained space, they were pretty standard lots. So the biggest size was 5,000 to 15,000 square feet. So a pretty standard urban residential lot. And um, then the part that was lawn was typically less than 5,000 square feet. And then the next one was just a little bit larger than that. So not very many super large properties. So most of us are in that boat. Those of you who have big rural properties with lots of opportunities have different things to think about when you're thinking about landscape design. Um, so some of them, we asked them, do you have the ability to change the landscape's appearance? And a fair number of them said no, but it may have depended on how they perceived that question. So let's talk about what some of those things might be. We were able to ask them about their aesthetic preferences using some cool approaches that we've never done before, and I'll show those with you in a minute, but they tend to focus on the components of landscape design, like plant composition, the edges in the landscape, color, the extent of the landscape, how tall it is. Sometimes height is a barrier, sometimes it is appreciated, the types of groupings of plants, and then there were some other examples of precedent landscapes and what people were drawn to from that perspective. So we were able to use a really cool AI tool that's an Adobe product so that we were able to use basically the same photo and then manipulate just one variable per image and have people really look closely at that. So we'll look at that in just a minute. The first thing was, just in general, from wherever your perspective is, what is your aesthetic preference? And we all have something different, whether we are from Kansas or not from Kansas, the things that make us feel comfortable and at home. We did an activity like this in our department a few years ago, and we had wildly different responses for uh, the types of environments that people felt comfortable in and the ones that excited them and all their reasons. So it's totally fine to like all of them or none of them because we all have our own preferences. But in this case, our respondents mostly preferred the woodland, which is this one, followed by the meadow, the oak savanna, and the prairie. So, but overall, they had very high interest in all of these. So they felt like it fit their aesthetic preferences for plant composition. What about edges? So here are some of those images that uh, reflect just one variable that's been changed. So what are our preferences? Here in the first image, you can see that the edge of the walkway has a little fence. In the second option, there's a layer of mulch right next to the edge. In the third option, there's a layer of turf right next to the edge. And in the fourth option, the plants go all the way up to the edge. So the respondents in our survey found that the greatest number of people liked number four, so plants going all the way to the edge, but we do still have a clean edge with the sidewalk as a part of this process. The next one that was interesting was the one with mulch, so a natural surface, followed by a little bit of a layer with turf grass, and the last one was the fence. So just differences in what people liked. Another variable that we evaluated was plant height. So you can see in the first image there, it's just turf grass, so it's very short and mown close to the ground. In image two, we have somewhat low growing plants. In three, the height increases, maybe a medium size height, and number four is considered tall. So in this response case, image number one was by far the least preferred, was just the grass as part of the landscape. And the most preferred was number three, which was a medium height. So that makes a lot of sense. It's not so tall you can't see over it and looks potentially messy, but also not so short that there's not a lot of interest in it. So lots of things can fit inside of a medium height category landscape. So here were these precedent photos. So in this case, we're saying the very first image is somewhat typical for many places in Kansas. And then we have these other examples of landscape designs that would be considered naturalistic in one form or another. And these came from all over the country. And in fact, this last one, number 7, is actually in Manhattan in a residential area. So, it was sort of mid-range in terms of what people like, but I think this one in particular is interesting because it's a fairly formal design with grasses, and yet it's on a very small lot and it is still naturalistic. So there's some different perspectives. Number 6 was the most preferred, followed by number 1 up here at the top, and then number 4 came in after that, number 2, then we're back at 7, 5, and 3 was the least preferred on here. And I can see it does look a little bit weedy in this picture. So what were some of the things that drew people to this idea of naturalistic landscape designs or landscapes? So the very highest number one that we're looking at is increase in pollinator population. So they're very committed to supporting pollinators, followed very closely by water conservation. They're interested in plant biodiversity and a connection to nature, lower maintenance requirements. They wanted to increase wildlife habit, improve appearance, lower their costs, and lower on the scale, we've got educational benefits, some other items, and a potential increase in property or resale value was really the smallest of their concerns for pursuing a landscape that was in the naturalistic landscape style. So we also asked, do you actively incorporate a naturalistic landscape at your residence? And most people, 63%, said yes, partly, some areas. A small group, 12% said yes, full, large majority. It's all naturalistic landscape style. And then another 18% said no, but I'm interested in this topic. And only 5% said nope. No, thank you. So, hey, that's good to know about yourself, and everybody has their reasons for making different decisions at different times in their lives. So that's fine. But I like those are big selling points. So if you're thinking about advocating for naturalistic landscapes, these are some things that you can highlight to people who might potentially be interested. What are some of the challenges? So some of this is just a lack of education, which I think is what we're trying to address at K-State through this fairly big initiative to address this is what are the challenges or the installation establishment challenges. I think there are some things we have not explored on the research side, so I'm excited to tackle those, find out what they are, and then see how we can address them through research. So installation and establishment challenges was the big one. Some of that is costs. Some of it is they don't know how. And there is a little bit of a challenge with naturalistic landscapes in terms of they can be, depending on what you plant, sometimes they can be slow to take off and fill in the space. And so lots of people want an instant landscape that's completely full. And sometimes we have to be patient and wait a little bit, and that can be a challenge. And those issues are related to its appearance, any potential maintenance challenges, and maybe that's just that you don't know what to do, or maybe it's difficult to do for you and you may need help. Lack of time or a perception that it does take a lot of time and they don't have that. Social pressure from the public is certainly a challenge that we have to overcome, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you may have neighbors that come by and comment on it negatively or positively. Perhaps a homeowners association or local ordinances, those can be challenges as well. Um, some just prefer a traditional lawn, and there's also nothing wrong with that. There's room for everything in our world, and it's okay if you have a different preference. Some had some monetary concerns, but maybe that is related to installation and establishment. And there were two sides of the coin with wildlife, right? So some people were concerned about more pests and potential pests and wildlife being in their landscape, and others at the end were delightfully surprised to see an increase in wildlife in their landscape. So, pros and cons to both of those. Some people were unfamiliar with the concept or worried that it might decrease their property value, which depending on how you manage it or don't manage it, that could be an issue. And then there was some concern with homeowner association guidelines or local laws. And you can see on again, these are deterring factors and challenges. We have native plant design, planting in dry, shady areas, lack of moisture in western Kansas. So some very specific site things or related to rules and regulations or a spouse who prefers something different and concern about invasiveness or things they don't know or they just haven't had the opportunity to learn yet or they don't have anybody to help them. So those are all things that we can work through for sure. Now, what are these pieces that I want you to really think about in terms of the naturalistic landscape design continuum? What I feel like I hear from people is an all or nothing approach. It has to be either one way or the other on a couple of different features. So those things are it's too formal or it's not formal enough um, versus messy. So how can I have a naturalistic landscape style that is still formal um, because I'm concerned about the messiness or the perception of messiness. So it's important to make a distinction between naturalistic style not being the same as messy. So messy means it's neglected, it's weedy, it's not cared for. That is a problem. Whereas a naturalistic style is very intentional, and we are choosing to highlight plants that do have great ornamental value in addition to their ecological function, and they are doing what they do in their natural habitat, and we are letting them grow to that size and in the growth habit that makes sense for their species. Um, but you can do that on a lot of different levels. You get to choose the level of formality that fits your home, your neighborhood, and your comfort level. Just keep in mind, people like those defined edges. They prefer clear groupings. They are drawn to color and texture, and they dislike chaos or randomness in a landscape. It feels messy, it feels uncomfortable, it feels uncared for and neglected. So that is what we are trying to move away from with a naturalistic landscape design style. Now, the other thing that often comes up, and this has happened even with the current grad student we have in landscape architecture, we were really debating, are we talking about native or are we talking about a naturalistic design style? So there's room for both in all of that. You can see in this graphic that naturalistic landscape design exists on a continuum. You can have an entirely with your natives, you can have an entirely native landscape. You do nothing but natives, things that were only here in your particular location. You can drill down as deeply as you want to, or keep it at a broad, specific ecological region, or Kansas in general, or wherever it is that you are. Or you can mix in some more modern plants with the Kansas natives. Or you can do a complete 50-50 mix of newer introduced plants that also serve those functions. Now, I'm not going to talk today a lot about specific plants because we have resources available for that. So if there's an opportunity in the chat, we've got lots of native plant resources. We have some non-native plant resources, and we're all trying to select plants that can handle our environmental conditions, whether they are native or not. It just depends on the resources that you are selecting from to make those decisions. There's a lot to choose from. So we'll stick some of those in the chat and have them in the resource list, but just know that you can totally mix them. If you are, the main thing to think about when you're mixing is if you are trying to support pollinators and other insects, you will probably want to choose plants that do not have double blooms or multiple layers of petals because those are difficult for insects to get their feeding parts down into, and that's what they need the flowers for, is to support their food. So if we are thinking about providing food sources all the way through the season, we can choose from a lot of different plants native and non-native, that will meet those needs, but just keeping those flowers as simple as possible so that our insects can enjoy them. Um, we might also have a modern ecological perspective where we're thinking about stormwater drainage and maximizing the needs of the site with the plant selection. And you can have a completely non-native landscape design that is still naturalistic in style. So there's no right or wrong way to approach this. They're all correct because they're all getting us outside and improving our natural environment and enjoying that space and improving our health. So enjoy the things that you enjoy and appreciate them for what they are and what they bring into your life. So, what are some of those practical design steps if you want to maybe incorporate naturalistic landscape design style into some or all of your landscape? It may vary depending on where you live and what the resources are around you, how much space you have, and all of your preferences. There's so many things to choose from. And I love this image because it's a lot of perennials. So I maybe would want a little bit more structures with some shrubs in it for me, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's beautiful the way that it is. All of these design principles, when we're talking about landscape design, would apply to a traditional landscape design as well as a naturalistic design. But your plant selections make the difference in the naturalistic design process because you're looking at plants that are suited to our ecological niche. Wherever we are choosing plants that can take these Kansas conditions or the conditions wherever we live. So, but broadly speaking, we're thinking about layers in the landscape. We want some tall layers, we want some medium layers, and we want some low layers. You can choose that in any landscape design style. That is going to be something that you're thinking about. But if you're choosing plants that are maybe more tolerant of our conditions, that's your filter, right? Plant massing always makes a huge difference in our perception of the a landscape effect. So that's where you maybe have fewer plants selected. You choose to have a more simple palette, but you plant more of those same plants so that they are seen in a bigger drift. Perhaps when you're driving by or walking past, it is experienced as a much more cohesive landscape than when you just plant lots of different things. And let me tell you, people who like horticulture are the worst at this, right? We want to be a little mini arboretum in our own yard. If you're going to do that, just get some plant labels out. You'll educate everybody. But we like to collect plants and we like to try different things, but the end result is often a lack of cohesion for the person who just happens to be driving by. So if you are thinking about practicing any landscape style, but particularly naturalistic styles, massing them will make a big difference. Also be thinking about repetition and rhythm. So a cohesive flow throughout the landscape. Naturalistic styles can be formal and rigid, but they tend to be more curvilinear in their approach. And if you are repeating your planting groups, it presents as a more cohesive experience for everyone. What about helping people know that it's not messy and neglected, but it is intentional in its letting the plants do what it is that they do naturally? So some of those things that we can be thinking about making sure that it is signals to people that this is a cared for landscape are things like clean edges and borders. There's lots of materials that you can use for that define the line between the managed turf and the wilder, perhaps native or just ornamental beds. If you have a larger space, perhaps in a more rural area, and you want to do something like a prairie or a meadow, one way you can help people know that this is intentional is by mowing strips and pathways for humans to walk through and experience that space at a different level. And that helps make it more accessible, and it shows that you're doing ongoing maintenance and that what you're choosing to do is intentional. Down here, number three, clearly marking transitions into natural areas with formal entrances, arbors, or gates. They can signal the start of an intentional space. So rather than just having an uh, a landscape that doesn't have any indication of what's what, you can still have a clean edge and path going through it, and signage. Or if you're a public garden, you're going to have signage. If it's your home, you may have another way of indicating this way to the naturalistic landscape style, or some other way. Just entering a gateway into a fenced backyard says, hey, change your pace and enjoy what's here. So they're just things that help signal a change. Mulched or gravel pathways will, uh, or concrete or paver ones can perform the same way, but these feel a little bit more tied to the natural environment if you have the opportunity to do a surface like this. Here's just some examples of what this might look like in a small urban lot. So you can still do a naturalistic landscape style with clean edges, still have mown areas, and show distinct perspectives. Or perhaps you have lots of acres out here in the Flint Hills, and you might be able to do something that is more wild looking. We still have some very specific species in here that are growing and doing their thing in their natural environment, and we have a mown edge space that is carrying us through the landscape. So if you have either of these scenarios, I would love to come visit you. So please come tell me about it. That would be super fun. What if you have small spaces, though? What can you do if you are a renter, or you have a very small space and you can't do a whole lot with it? Well, there's always options. Of course, we have container gardens that we can select native species, or species from that fit this ecological niche with compact habits, and just mix them in a container display is a nice way that you can do that function. Here is just a little patio type space. You can do a lot, even with the small spaces that you might have. Spend some time going vertical with species that you might have elsewhere. And you can always go to public gardens and see these plants in person and decide if you think they're going to fit what works, what the space that you have. And also, like, don't forget, gardening is supposed to be fun. And sometimes plants fail, and that means an opportunity to try something new. So, and other times you might say, I liked this plant, but it's kind of like had its day and I'm ready for something different. That's always an opportunity to try something new. You're not married to your choices forever with horticulture and with plants. You can keep changing them and trying new things as much as you would like. Sometimes you might have just a little strip of land on the side of your house, and you can still do a pocket habitat in that space. Just pay attention to the environmental conditions. Um, you can't totally abandon them. I mean, if you haven't gotten water for a long time, they may still need some water, so you have to pay attention to that. But I would imagine the biggest challenge in an environment like this little pocket habitat would be having enough light. So a lot of these the ones up close to the house are probably more shade tolerant. Maybe hostas would fit that bill pretty well. And the others might need a little bit more sun than is available. And you know what? Some of this is trial and error. Did this work? Did it not work? I'm going to try something different. And that's all okay. If you have a large space, here are some things that you can be thinking about. Sweeping vistas with diverse mixes of plants, establishing these visual connections across long distances, and thinking about these large scale approaches with the space that you have available. Um, your meadow edges and transitions. I love this image. You've got a nice concrete pathway that goes into an edge. One side of it, in the foreground, it has a naturalistic style on both sides that transitions to lawn on another. And then you're going to go around the bend and experience an entirely different ecological space. So there's always opportunities to spread that out. You also see lots of repetition and rhythm in the plant choices. And if you have the space where you need to be thinking about blocking sounds or sights, things that change the space that you have. You might be able to do some land sculpting and have some berms and grow some more trees and shrubs on those spaces to create a different kind of environment. So you can still have this be a naturalistic landscapes just style, depending on what you're trying to achieve in your landscape. All right. Let's talk a little bit about overcoming challenges because there may be a fair bit. A picture like this might be perceived as messy to some people, or it might be perceived as perfect to some people. So everybody's mileage may vary, but in aggregate, what are some things that we might be thinking about and how can we overcome them? So we asked our respondents in the survey questions like, how much space would you have for this? And most of them, it was, or 36% a pretty small space, 33% more than 400 square feet. Who's going to do the work? Most of us said, I'm going to do the work. Um, but there was, 30%. It's an opportunity for landscape contractors to come in and provide a service and provide help where we may be not interested or not able to do the install work or the maintenance work. Um, Again, this was a horticulture interest audience, and we asked them about their confidence in their horticulture skills. And on average, they had mid to high ranges for 13 skills that we mentioned that were related to maintaining a naturalistic landscape. But the big one was, how much time does it take? And surprisingly, um, so the specific question was, is maintenance with a naturalistic landscape more or less than with a non-naturalistic landscape? And our respondents who had experiences with both actually said that a naturalistic landscape design style was less work than a more traditional landscape. So if you think about how the frequency of mowing, if you reduce your lawn size, that right there can reduce the amount of maintenance that you might have to manage in a naturalistic landscape style. Now, whether or not you can do it is a different question based on where you live. So, so there was the question of what do my neighbors think and what are my neighbors going to say? So this is a question about feedback. So the top one is, how often did you get feedback about your naturalistic landscape style? Because I think some of us have some fear that everybody's going to be talking about it and they're not going to like it and they're going to have a comment every time they walk by. And, actually, it wasn't that bad. So on a scale of 0 to 5, from little to none to frequently, it fell on the lower half of that. So fewer people asked about it than they expected. And when they did ask about their naturalistic landscape style, it was largely positive in terms of the interactions that they had with people. Most people were genuinely curious. What is this? What have you done? What sorts of choices are you making? And that makes for interesting conversations with your neighbors. Yes, we are building community. So some of those comments were that people might make. It looks a little weedy and it looks weedy and a little out of control. But when in bloom, commenters like the looks. Friends let me know that the new landscaping is much better than the previous landscaping. That's different. Why? My kids are walking through it, which to me means, hey, people are interested and they're engaging with their environment. Um, 1.31 out of 5 people would be inclined to report a resident if they felt that their landscape violated the HOA, the Homeowners Association ordinance. So a pretty low inclination for our group of people, but they certainly were concerned about being reported. Um, they also talked about how the conversation generally begins with how much they love the space, but um, uh, eventually turns into, but I could never do that. And then they talk about the discomfort they have with doing anything but traditional turf grass. So maybe they just need more resources and more learning opportunities to begin to get comfortable with it. They're happy to see anyone being involved in bee habitat. And another person who was concerned, the city has cited me 3 times in the last 5 years for having weeds, telling me that my neighbors have complained. The neighbors deny it. But my weeds are native prairie flowers and grasses. And then the biggest piece was don't give up. It doesn't happen overnight and it takes time, and that's okay. And we can all work through it together. Okay, so naturalistic landscape design challenges. What were those? So there was a big old pile of other, and that's what you see here in the gray. Water, drought, wasps, deer, cost, all of those pieces that are concerning to people. Others, and they do boil down into things like managing the aesthetics with expectations, adapting to changing weather conditions, native plant sourcing. So we have some answers for you on that. Educational challenges, myself and others, like I need to know more, and also I need to know more so I can tell others what I'm doing on purpose. Wildlife concerns, and that probably is different depending on where you live and what things are concerning to you. Some fewer people were concerned about negative reactions by the public or fire and safety. Those were not things that people were concerned about. So we can emphasize some of these other items that people were not sure how to handle or how to address. So a lot of those centered around how to engage with people in your neighborhood and your homeowners association and people who set ordinances who aren't aware of the ecological benefits of gardening in this way. So if you're when you're going to have those conversations, lead with shared values and why this is important to you. Think about beauty and order and pollinators and property value and water conservation. More and more in today's world, we need to be concerned with water conservation. And so, if we can emphasize those positive benefits, we can maybe find some common ground. Make sure that they know that this is an intentional design. Show them that the landscape is planned. Highlight the edges and the paths and the grouping and the structure. And if you have some of them with you, you can provide some visual examples from other places, especially if it's like early in the establishment phase and you're like, it's getting there. Hold on, let me show you what it's going to look like. You can share those photos of attractive, neat, naturalistic gardens. Then, explain the benefits simply. Talk about lower inputs and seasonal color, wildlife habitat, and stormwater benefits. Make sure that they know that you're thinking about the maintenance plan. Talk about outlining those mowing edges, the seasonal cutbacks, and the regular touch-up, those maintenance things that you're going to be doing. And it's just maybe not the right time for them for whatever, all plants do things at a different time, and their maintenance needs happen at different times. So just explain the plant biology aspect of that if you're able to. And then, if you are concerned about it, work with the HOA early. Provide plant lists, diagrams, and clear boundaries, and talk about what you're about to do and your installation practices and what that is going to look like and what the expectations will be, and that you will not let it get out of hand and weedy and concerning, and that it will be a benefit to the neighborhood if you are working with an HOA. So those are some approaches that you can take, and always you have resources if things get challenging and we need to work through them together. Okay, so to wrap up our discussion today, the conclusions of the survey were that appearance is the number two deterring factor for surveyees without a naturalistic landscape, so that is a barrier for them. So managing aesthetics with expectations ranked number two for challenges from those with naturalistic landscapes. Others were concerned about installation and establishment. It was the number one deterring factor and challenge for those considering naturalistic landscapes. They had the least amount of confidence in designing a naturalistic landscape, so we can get support from professionals with this. And in the other category, it was these topics really ranked number one on naturalistic landscape challenges, with many people talking about invasive species. So it's certainly something we can work through with everyone. Water conservation is the second highest interest for installing a naturalistic landscape because that is a net benefit to what we're trying to accomplish. And Master Gardener volunteers and extension publications were the number one inspiration and interest sources. Users with naturalistic landscapes report feedback is primarily positive. So that was all very, very exciting and good news. And 65% of people do not think a naturalistic landscape compared to a neighborhood of manicured lawns lowers a community's sense of unity. So that should not be a concern. And then that last piece with the environment, an increase in pollinator population is the number one interest for installing a naturalistic landscape. And that there were large amounts of increased pollinator and bird activity reported after installing a naturalistic landscape. So if that's interesting for you, that's definitely a place to go with your interest in that landscape design style. So remember, these are the key characteristics of naturalistic landscape design. We've got native and adapted plants. We're thinking about ecological function. We're layering in those different plant layers that mimic our natural plant communities. Ground covers, grasses, perennial shrubs, and trees, all of them, they all fit. We've got organic forms and flowing lines, although there can be a place for a formal landscape design as well if you do it right. Seasonal interest and succession throughout the season, low input maintenance, and a sense of place. So in Kansas, we are really thinking about the prairie and this high plains that we live in and highlighting it. If we can bring that into a small urban lot, then we can be connected to the place that we live. And lastly, your key takeaways. I just want you to think about and remember that naturalistic design is very flexible. It works on a continuum. It can be native to mixed to modern, and it can fit any Kansas garden, no matter how big or how small. Intentional design is what makes it successful. So don't forget those edges and groupings and repetition and structure that helps the naturalistic landscapes keep from feeling messy. And, Kansas are open to this style. So if you're a landscape contractor and you're interested in supporting this, there is a fair amount of interest and people who do want you to help them. And from our perspective and extension, it means there's a real opportunity for us to help you learn more and so that you can be more successful. So if you have ideas for what kind of resources you want that would help you, let us know what those are so we can work on them. We definitely are planning a course of work in this area. I am, and I think the agents would be supportive of that as well. Um, Blending your plants works. We've got that native and well-adapted non-native plants can create resilient, beautiful, low input landscapes. And then communication is important when you are going to plant in this way. And so talking proactively with your neighbors and your homeowners association builds support and reduces concern. So with all of that, I hope that you have come away inspired to try a new practice in your landscape or to consider it, and that you'll tell us what you need so we can help you be successful moving forward. And with that, I am going to unshare my screen so we can take questions with the last few minutes.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. That was wonderful and hit all the high points. We were going fast and furiously in the Q&A,
Oh,
and but
I usually can see
you were
it.
addressing things as questions were coming in. So we've got a number here that we haven't been able to get to yet. First off, what type of weed control do you use next to natural spaces or pollinator plants with bees?
I think that would be really specific to what you're growing and what you're trying to protect. So weed control, if you're using a chemical control, those are all very specific. We need to look closely at those. If you're talking about cultural controls, there's probably a fair bit of things. Again, that's maintenance. So we've got to be thinking about what our capacity is and what our ability to manage those things is. So I don't have any specific recommendations, but if you have a scenario and you'd like to bring it to one of our extension horticulture professionals, we can walk through some more of those choices with you.
Great, thank you. That is always a top answer, is talk to your local agent for very specific situations. A question about the survey that you described, is there a paper published on this survey that can be shared?
I'm so glad you asked. It's been on my to-do list for far too long. So I'm the last couple years, every year I'm like, this is the year I'm going to get it done because the student did everything properly, but she moved on, and I'm the one who wants to get it published. So it's on my high priority list. So I hope to work on that this summer and move that through the pipeline so we'd have it available for sharing and for building off of later this year or at the latest early next year.
Great. We will all look forward to that. Next question, where can people find help with designing naturalistic landscapes?
Oh, we have so many professionals in the state. And I'll tell you, I presented a different version of this at our Turf and Landscape Conference, which is for industry professionals in December, not last year, but the year before. And I did like a really fast 30-minute version. I actually had way more slides in it with more data, and the room was packed. So there's tons of professional contractors who are really interested in supporting your interest in this. I would check with your local chamber of commerce to see who's available in your area. There's a lot to choose from. In fact, it's probably our biggest employment sector in the entire state are landscape contractors and those who work in that area. But your local extension professional is going to be familiar with who those businesses are and what their capabilities are and which ones are more inclined to support that type of work.
Great. A couple more specific questions here about planting close to house foundation with native plants, especially some of our deeper rooted native plants and
Right.
grasses.
Okay, so you're concerned about invasive surface roots invading into a foundation, is what I'm hearing that question ask.
That's what the question appears to be.
Yeah, again, it's going to be site specific. So you need to think about like if you're going to plant some of those really deep rooted grasses up next to your foundation, they might actually not like it there. So if you're really concerned about that, we also have publications on Firewise landscaping that recommends not having anything right up next to the house. It really depends on where you are in terms of your ability, your adjacentness to some of those challenges. I think I would have to take it on a plant by plant basis, but I think there's a ton of choices that are not going to cause problems to your foundation. Definitely stay away from willow. You should all know that. But beyond that, I don't think it's nearly as much of a concern as you might think it is.
Yes, and that's great advice. And yes, our colleagues over at the Kansas Forest Service would frown on planting some of those grasses
Right up next
next
to the house.
Right. Let's see. Another question about where can one learn about the spread, basically how these native plantings develop over time is what I'm seeing here. In terms of its spread and its development of its full form. So are there
Right.
some good resources?
So I actually picked up a few books as I've been pondering this topic for a while. Some of the big names in naturalistic landscape design are like the landscape architecture firm Ohm van Sweden. There's also let's see, hold on. Hold please. Pierre Adolphe, some of his books. So if you want to see like what some of those will look like, you can look at a book like this. But I was super surprised that this was more just like plant lists and sort of broad inspiration. It's not Kansas specific. So we need some Kansas specific examples. I would love to be able to document that and watch some of these spaces grow. So if you have that, please reach out and let us know so that we can be a part of educating people for the future and seeing how they go. Otherwise, you're going to just want to look at plant recommendations and look at the height, the mature height and spread, and make sure you give it enough space. So it might look small when you first plant it, especially herbaceous plants will fill in really, really quickly. And there are other approaches you can take with, trees and shrubs that take a while to get to maturity. You can plant closer than you might want for final landscape design and then remove some things as that plant gets mature and puts more shade and things like that. So there's different approaches to just learn more about all those plants. That's the fun part of gardening, right?
Yes, and it looks like there's a bunch of people putting different resources in the chat as
Hot
well
dog.
that you might look into that. So go ahead and do that. We did have a quick question. What was the title of that book again, please?
Oh, this one was planting the natural garden. I also have lots of resources on water-wise landscaping and drought-tolerant landscape. Here's one called Planting in a Post-Wild World. It's all just part of educating yourself on these styles and information and gathering everything you can and take what works and discard what doesn't. It's all okay. We all get to pick and make these choices.
Yes, it's good to experiment. And this is
Yes.
a fun part of gardening is to experiment. And a question here also, again, talk to your local agent. Somebody questioning whether they should start with seed or small starting plants, where to buy things. And again, that's going to be very locally sourced.
Right. And it depends on your budget too. Like you can do a lot with seeds. And you can do a lot with small liner plants, and you can find sources for all of that in lots of different places. So there's a lot of different ways to tackle that.
Yeah, great. So once again, please talk to your agent, and thank you, Cheryl. Again, that's all the time we have. So I'll turn it back over to Andrea for closing comments.
Thanks,
you.
y'all.
We typically have more questions than we have time for, but we will be sure to link several of the articles related to this session on our website. We have these resources. We hope these resources will help to answer your questions, but if you need additional information, like we've been saying, please contact your local K-State Extension office. Again, thank you for joining our K-State Garden Hour series hosted by K-State Extension. We are glad you could be here today to learn about naturalistic landscape design. You can visit the K-State Garden Hour website to view our recorded, Garden Hour archives, or to make a tax-deductible donation to support the continuation of this webinar series. This series was recorded and will be posted on the website by tomorrow afternoon. After this webinar ends today, you will receive a prompt to take an evaluation. Please fill it out. We greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thanks again. Thank you, Cheryl. We hope you continue to tune in each month and have a great week.